If it's not written down, it didn't happen. That's a phrase that lots of people believe, and broadly speaking, I think they believe it for one of a couple of different reasons. Either that because it's not written down that they can get away with saying it didn't happen and lie effectively to say something else happened or that it just didn't happen at all, or secondly that it's much more difficult to prove. Now, it's the latter which I'm going to dwell on a little bit in this video. But first of all, if you're new to me, I'm a barrister who helps you understand law. So I'd really appreciate you smash that like button and subscribe because it helps me to reach a wider audience. So if it isn't written down, does that mean that it just isn't valid? No, of course not, because many things are not written down. As I once said in a video a few weeks ago, if you go to a supermarket and you buy something, it may not be written down because you may not have a receipt, but even then there's some kind of receipt usually. But very often, if you buy something, there is no written contract at all. So sometimes people have come to us and said, there's no contract. It was just agreed verbally, and I gave them money, they gave me the thing, it's broken, and I want my money back. But there's no contract, they say. But obviously that's not true either, because a contract must meet the minimum requirements for a contract. That is an offer, acceptance, and consideration. Everybody gets something. This then brings into the question, well, what happens in a shop when there's a price on the shelf and you take it to the counter to pay for it and they say, oh no, mistake with the price, it's actually this much. Many people wrongly believe that you can enforce your right to buy it at the price that it was on the shelf for, which is of course not true. Because once it's on the shelf with a price attached to it, that's an invitation to treat in law. It's inviting you to make an offer to purchase it, which you're doing when you take it to the counter and say, I'd like to buy this at the price that was given on the shelf. They might then say, well, actually, no, I'm not going to sell it to you, and they don't have to sell it to you. The same goes for whether they accept coins or checks or card or whatever it is that they may or may not accept as a form of payment, which is also why they can say a minimum spend on credit cards, for example. But anyway, we digress. So if it isn't written down, it's just more difficult to prove. So one of the biggest problems that we get as lawyers is when you cannot prove your claim, you cannot prove the agreement, you cannot prove the contract. That's because it wasn't written down. Now, I'm here to tell you that if ever you enter an agreement with somebody, and if ever you agree to buy something or any of those kind of things, at the very, very least, get in writing the form of agreement that you've had between yourselves. Because the only way you can really prove what the agreement was is if it's contained in some form of written dialogue, whether it's reduced to writing as a proper formal contractual agreement with all the different clauses, including one such as an entire agreement clause, meaning that everything else that's not within the agreement is not within the agreement because it's an entire agreement clause. Only that which is contained within the agreement is part of the agreement. That's something that very often you'll get in a properly drawn up agreement, a contract, if you will. But otherwise, at the very least, in an exchange of messages, you do this, I do that, quid pro quo will turn out to be some kind of contract, which you can then prove. But how do you then gather together that evidence? Well, as an aside, I'm glad you asked the question, we are developing an app called Proofify, which will allow you to store the evidence to prove whatever contract there was between you. Allow me to give you some examples. Imagine your friend wants to borrow a DVD for some length of time. Now, ordinarily, borrowing it for a length of time won't necessarily meet the minimum terms of a contract because there's not necessarily any consideration on your part. So strictly speaking, to be an enforceable contract, you each need to get something. So there needs to be an offer, acceptance, and consideration. And those kind of agreements very often fall down on the consideration part. What you can do, however, is when someone has borrowed something from you and fails to return it, it's your property. So if they treat it as though they are the owner, that's called conversion because they are treating it as though they now own it, which is not true because it's still yours because they haven't purchased it. And so unless they've stolen it, which is a more severe version of conversion of property, conversion is just treating it as though they are the owner. But if they are deemed to be treating it as the owner, you can get an order that it's returned. That's what your claim would be for in court. So how are you going to prove that? Well, you can get them to confirm on the app Proofify that they've borrowed this thing, whatever it is, a DVD or some kind of computer game, you can get them to confirm that they've borrowed it. So that if ever later on you need to prove that they borrowed it and haven't yet returned it, then your claim to have it returned would be fairly clear-cut. Believe it or not, we've even had cases like this with animals, where the animal has gone to live with another party for a period of time, but hasn't been returned. And then there's an argument as to whose dog it is, or whose cat it is, or whatever it might be. So in those kind of situations, if you documented the fact that you are borrowing this dog or whatever for a week or however long, but you document it on this app, Proofify, you can then use this, if ever you need to bring a claim for the return of the dog. But then there's a whole host of other areas, such as people getting work done at their house. They get a fence put up, they get a kitchen built or redecorated, or a boiler repositioned, or any of these kind of things. If there is subsequent damage, now this is an unbelievably common scenario. If damage is caused or the work is shoddy and you just need to get the work repaired, or you need to claim back some of your money because they've just messed it up, or even walked off site and haven't done the work, how are you going to prove a bunch of various things, such as the condition of the property before they turned up to do the work? What did they agree to do? Did they show you a sample? Did they measure up? Did they give you the measurements? Did they confirm the measurements to you? What time scale did they agree to, and how much? And does that include the internals, the decorating? Does it include the materials? Does it include anything else, such as travel and expenses, and so on and so forth? Well, we will build into Proofify the ability to confirm what you've agreed, for how much, what style, were you shown a sample? If you're shown a sample, take a photograph of the sample. The app will store it. The app will create a blueprint of what it is that you've agreed. Because if later down the line something isn't done the way you've agreed, you will have a blueprinted pack of evidence that you can present in court. Because many people cannot afford lawyers, 1 for the advice, and 2 for the bundling of all the paperwork, and 3 for actually going to court and running it. But not that this is going to completely replace any of that, but what it will do is bundle together the evidence so you can present this to court in the most concise and consistent way. We may even build in the facility for you to build your witness statement on what happened, when did it happen, what did they say, when did they say it, why did they say it, which bit of evidence is going to link up to prove what you've said. And conveniently, that bit of evidence will be stored on the back of the app. So, as I said at the outset of the video, if it isn't written down, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It just means that it's more difficult to prove. And so I am working very closely with the developer to make this easier for you to prove. And the app is Proofify. Sign up at the waitlist in the description below. We will be launching an initial version very soon. I'm very excited. Join the waitlist to be on that list for the early bird special pricing structure before it goes up in price. And in the meantime, please smash the like button and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.